Welcome to Good Libations, which is our program about mixology in all its various forms and hopefully creative forms. We're going to make drinks that are typically associated with winter, which doesn't necessarily mean all hot drinks. And I'm going to start out with a bourbon Alexander, which is one of the many variants of brandy Alexanders and the Alexander drink in general. And incidentally, the very first Alexander drink was gin-based, and it did incorporate cream de cocoa, and it came about at the turn of the century, if you could believe that. But then after that, the brandy Alexander became very popular, especially starting in the 30s. But the drink I'm going to make today is the bourbon Alexander, because I've made a brandy Alexander before. And bourbon Alexanders are good because they sort of celebrate America's liquor, you might say, bourbon, which of course the idea of making bourbon was brought over by Scottish and Irish people and their whiskey making skills. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And the Alexander actually started in general with a bartender in New York at a place called Rector's Restaurant and Bar, and his name was Troy Alexander. And to start, it's best if an Alexander is mixed in a cocktail shaker. And of course my shaker, as you know, has a tendency to be quite uncooperative. So we'll see what it does today. And we're actually going to start with the bourbon. And as you know, I hand pour, or free pour, which irritates people sometimes, but you get a better, stronger drink this way. So I'm going to pour in the bourbon. And then after that, we always use cream de cocoa in an Alexander. And unfortunately, I had to obtain a cream de cocoa after going to 4 different places that was light colored, whereas I far prefer to use a dark colored one, but this is what we're stuck with today. The flavor is the same, but appearance-wise, it's not going to look quite as nice. And then we're going to put some ice in here, and we're going to proceed to shake it, because it always should be cold. Contrary to what some people might say, and not an overwhelming. So I'm going to shake it and hope this thing will come apart. And the cap doesn't like to stay on either. So I'm going to go ahead and pour now, after making somewhat of a mess. And I'm sorry to say again, but you know, the appearance is not going to be as rich and elegant looking because of the fact that I had to use white cream de cocoa or cream de cacao. And now we're going to put a top of heavy cream on it. And it's always better to use heavy cream rather than whipping cream. What we do is we want to get a float on top. We don't want to mix it in like many people do when they make a brandy or a bourbon Alexander or any Alexander. They tend to mix the cream in, but it's much, much better if you get a float. And how we get a float on the top is we hold a teaspoon at a slight angle and we pour over the top of the teaspoon. And it should float on the very top. And it's cooperating fairly well, but not as well as I would have liked it to. So I probably should have shaken it more. And of course, the true test is the taste test, so I'm going to do just that. Oh, that is very nice. And I'll tell you, putting bourbon in it adds a better dimension to it. And that's another thing too, when you put a float of cream on the top, you're tasting the drink through the cream. And it's so much better than if it's mixed in. And the same principle with Irish coffee, coffee grabbers, you know, Scottish coffee, and another drink that we're going to make, a Kioki coffee. If you float the cream on the top, it is so much better. And just to review, if you're going to make any Alexander, whether it be the original one with gin, the brandy Alexander, the bourbon Alexander, or any spirit that you choose to use, you know, you want to use that spirit, pour it in first, over the ice in the shaker, pour in the cream de cocoa, and I would hope in the future to always be able to get, the brown one. And anyway, after you add those ingredients, you shake them in the shaker over ice. Pour them into either a traditional cocktail glass, an old-fashioned glass, or a coffee glass that's made of glass. And then float your heavy cream on the top. Shake it up really good. You don't have to whip it. And just put the teaspoon at an angle and pour over the teaspoon, and you should get a nice line of demarcation. And again, as I always say, when we have our events with alcoholic beverages, always make sure you have a designated driver, and make sure you keep control of your drinking, because you're not celebrating the mixologist who just chugged the drinks down. Take time to savor and enjoy them. Keep our community safe and well spoken of. And thanks again for tuning into Good Libations. Thank you again. Goodbye.